Lollipop?
We're back at it again, putting the villains of Blue Sky Studios to trial, and this time we're looking at the back half of their filmography. While it's not quite as memorable as the films they made in part 1, these films still have some great villains worthy of judging, so let's jump right in and wrap this series up. I'm Keefe Nosy with Wicked Binge, and today we're sentencing Blue Sky villains for their crimes. Again.
These got me my name.
I don't get it.
We revisit the Ice Age franchise once again and look at the villains of the fourth installment, Continental Drift. Make way for today's very first villain, Captain Gut. A pirate who's captain to an entire crew, Gut embodies the archetype of a classic pirate, not unlike Captain Hook and Peter Pan. As a pirate, he's already guilty of piracy, of course, and his quest to acquire as much wealth and fortune as possible also means he commits theft.
And here, your ship belongs to me.
Like many evil pirates, Gut is also horrible to the crew of his ship. He was particularly harsh to Shyr, who he left to drown after his ship collapsed, and also abused for failing him. We'll go ahead and count this as not just attempted murder, but torture as well. More than anything else, however, Captain Gut is motivated by a desire to kill Manny and everything he holds dear. He blames them for destroying his ship, and he will do all he can to make them pay. While he fails to take them out, it's heavily implied that he has murdered in the past, further proof of his insatiable bloodlust. Overall, Captain Gut is arguably the most dangerous threat the Ice Age protagonists have ever faced, and as such, is more than deserving of the death sentence. Like with any respectable pirate, the punishment will likely be carried out via hanging, and that end will probably still be better than some of the ones he gave his enemies. Alright, it's time to leave the world of Ice Age behind once again, as we embark to the fantasy world of Blue Sky's 2013 adventure film, Epic. Representing the Boggans, we have their leader, Mandrake. A classic fantasy villain, Mandrake leads the Boggans to war against the Leafmen as they try to take over their land. However, unlike a lot of villains you see in these types of movies, Mandrake is motivated by more than a simple lust for power. He wishes to avenge his son Dagda, who was killed by the Leafmen's leader, Ronin. Now he wants to see the entire kingdom torn to shreds, and he especially wants revenge on Ronin.
Where are they taking the pod?
This pursuit sees him become guilty of attempted murder, terrorism, and assault. He also kills an actual pivotal character in the form of the Queen, making him one of the only Blue Sky villains to have ever done so. A scarier and more intimidating type of villain than most of the ones we've seen in Blue Sky films, Mandrake is ultimately in for an entire lifetime behind bars. Some may say that he deserves the death penalty considering the fact that he not only went to war but also killed the leader of a kingdom, but we'll go a little easy on him here. While his actions were wrong, he was doing them out of revenge for the loss of his son, which does at least give him a somewhat sensible motive for his crimes. We just hope he enjoyed his time in the forest, as it's the last time he'll ever see a sight like that. We're heading back toward the Amazons for the next film we'll be looking at, Rio 2. We already looked at Nigel last time, so we'll jump right into the villains new to this installment. Starting with Big Boss. Big Boss leads a group of loggers who are slowly but surely destroying the Amazon forests, as well as the rare species that reside in them. We'll go ahead and chalk these both up as acts of eco-terrorism and poaching. Big Boss will even load up dynamite to blow up the trees found in the forests. Basically, if you ever thought you didn't enjoy the forest, you've got nothing on this guy. When the couple Linda and Tulio come around and pose a threat to his business, Big Boss makes sure to capture them so they'll no longer be a problem. Judging from some of the dialogue he has in the film, it's also implied that Big Boss has an interest in straight up murdering the pair.
Find them and get rid of them.
He will do anything he can to make sure his illegal operation is safe and sound. It's that determination that, unfortunately for him, has led us to decide to give him the death penalty. If Big Boss was let off easily, it would only be a matter of time before he found another environment to terrorize. As such, we think this is the most appropriate punishment. How the penalty is to be carried out depends, but if we're being honest, we cannot imagine a fate worse for him than being eaten alive by a snake, the very end he met in the film. Coming up next is Nigel's new minion, Gabby. A tree frog, Gabby is found by Nigel and tasked with helping him get revenge on Blue. She is utterly devoted to Nigel, as she's in love with him, and wants to get on his good side as much as possible. This makes her one of the most loyal and potentially deadliest sidekicks a Blue Sky villain has ever had. She aids Nigel in every step of his plan and even tries to poison Blue in his sleep.
Oh, that's my specialty.
Only some intervention from her crush Nigel puts a stop to this. An evil sidekick who manages to surprise even her boss, Gabby shows that size isn't everything and gets a sentence of 5 years in prison. She could have easily gotten a worse sentence, but she's mostly motivated out of a sense of love more than anything evil. That doesn't make her actions right nor justify them, but it does show that she's at least a bit more human than other villains we've covered today, despite the fact that she's a frog. Hopefully she'll find a new romantic partner soon, otherwise we'll be seeing her again any day now. Moving on. on, let us dive into Blue Sky's adaptation of a comic classic with the Peanuts movie. There's only one villain to look at here, and it's none other than Snoopy's old rival, the Red Baron. Like in any classic Peanuts story featuring the character, he dogfights the canine several times throughout the film, and each time emerges victorious. He engages in a few instances of property damage, but beyond that, he doesn't do anything particularly evil. Even with Snoopy, he bruises his ego more than his body. We also cannot forget the fact that the Red Baron is, of course, nothing more than Snoopy's imagination running wild. With that in mind, how exactly do we sentence this fellow? Well, the Red Baron is in luck, as he's getting our first and only pardon of today. Since he doesn't technically exist, it doesn't make much sense to punish him as if he were a real living and breathing person. Besides, if we left the Red Baron behind bars, who else would Snoopy have to battle against? We're taking one last stroll within the Ice Age franchise as we analyze the villains of the franchise's latest installment, Collision Course. First up on the stand is the Dakota Raptor, Gavin. Gavin's motivated by the need to survive more. He wants what's best for himself and his family, although his idea of what is the best could use some work. Most of his time is spent stealing dinosaur eggs, which makes him immediately guilty of theft. Soon after, he learns of Buck and his idea to stop a cataclysmic asteroid from hitting. He becomes focused on stopping Buck from doing this as he wants to rule the Earth and have everything to himself.
See, while you run for your mammal lives, we'll be high in the sky.
As the movie goes on, he tries to kill Buck and even almost eats Sid's grandmother after she's captured instead of Buck. That makes Gavin guilty of attempted murder and almost cannibalism, but thankfully for him, he does atone for his wrongdoings. After he realizes that he won't be able to survive the asteroid alone, he helps Buck and his friends stop the asteroid and becomes good friends with them after that's done. Gavin might have done a lot of awful deeds throughout the film, but many of them were done out of wanting what was best for the survival of his family. And after he was proven wrong, he immediately changed his ways for the better. Because of all of this, we think that what Gavin needs most is some community service time. Gavin has a much better conscience than most of the villains in Blue Sky's filmography, and it's that conscience that saves him from a far worse fate. Up next are Gavin's children, the son and daughter duo of Roger and Gertie, respectively. These two are not only Gavin's kids, but they also serve the role of his evil henchmen. That, of course, means that they're guilty of aiding and abetting. The two are also guilty of most other crimes their father committed. They steal dinosaur eggs, they try to kidnap and kill Buck. More or less everything we said about Gavin also applies to his kids.
Well, that's just hurtful.
That also includes his redemption and atonement, though. It was actually Roger who was the first to realize that they needed to help Buck if they were to survive, which further inspired Gertie and Gavin to do the same. Since they have essentially the same crimes and change of heart, it only makes sense that Roger and Gertie also get a round of community service as punishment. It's like they say, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. Time to look at the sole villain of Blue Sky's second to last film, Ferdinand. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the bullfighter, El Primero. One of the best bullfighters around, El Primero plans on retiring, but wishes to defeat the greatest bull he can find beforehand.
The best against the best.
He ultimately sets his sights on Ferdinand, but when the two finally face off, Ferdinand refuses to fight, and when he's eventually pushed into doing so, El Primero is repeatedly embarrassed by the bull until he's knocked out of the ring. He then becomes focused on killing Ferdinand, and nearly does so until Ferdinand remembers his pacifist ways and retreats, inspiring the crowd to push Primero into sparing him. So El Primero nearly committed murder here, but his refusal to do so, in the end, shows that he does have some sort of heart, even if it's partially motivated by the crowd. Because of that, El Primero will only have to spend a decade behind bars. While he can be dangerous and is certainly the type of person you wouldn't want around animals, he manages to have more of a conscience than similar villains we've looked at. He's at least better than Big Boss, that's for sure. We finally reached the last film Blue Sky ever put out. Get ready as we explore the villain of 2019's Spies in Disguise. It's about time we introduce our last villain, the genius mastermind, Kristijan. A terrorist who looks like he stepped right out of a James Bond film, Kristijan's out for revenge against the heroic Lance Sterling. Lance is his arch nemesis and the man responsible for the loss of his left arm, so it's quite important to Kristijan that he get rid of him.
Sleepy 99.
Right off the bat, he frames Lance for the theft of a drone through the use of a disguise, making him probably the only villain we've ever looked at that you can say is guilty of defamation. Kristijan's main goal is to produce an army of these drones, which he will then use to kill Lance and all of his fellow secret agents. This plan does fail in the end, but that doesn't erase the fact that Kristijan did kill a scientist while creating his army. Overall, Kristijan is a fittingly evil villain to wrap up Blue Sky's assortment of villains, and is more than deserving of a life sentence in prison. While some will argue that he should be sentenced to death, we will argue that there could be some good in keeping him behind bars. Kristijan could possibly be used to help track down accomplices of his, which would go a long way toward keeping humanity safe. Because of that, Kristijan gets spared. Besides, spending life in solitude is probably a worse fate for a supervillain like him. It's certainly not the fate befitting of a supervillain, and that's reason enough that he despises it. Spies in Despise. Sorry.